One. Guys, welcome back to this week's Coliseum Forum. This week, I am joined by somebody who I am a personally huge fan of, Matt Allison, creator of Cankor. Am I saying that right? I've always it's one of those things I've read and I've never said it.
Yeah, it sounds weird when I say it. I don't. There's no right or wrong way. It's like a canker sore,
Right.
but cankor is
Yeah, I've always like
you're right.
enunciated it a little harder at the end. It's like Cankor.
Yeah.
Um, I actually want to tell you the story of like me finding your work. We both know a guy named Et.
Hmm.
And he used to run a comic book shop. And I walked in one day, they had your book proudly on display, and I was just like, "This looks really weird. What is this?" And he's like, "Yeah, you need to buy a copy of that." And fortunately, since then, I've had the chance to meet you, and I've kind of collected most of the Cancor stuff. Um, but that was my introduction to your work, and I've been a fan, ever since like that happened. So if you're Edward, if you're
That's
watching, thank you for introducing me to Matt Allison. And now I get the opportunity to introduce Matt Allison to hopefully a lot more Coliseum people.
cool. Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you to Edward as well because he was a big supporter early on, ordering directly from me back when I was self-publishing.
Yeah.
So yeah, Edward's been great.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Um, well, first, what I mean, I think the thing I've learned from the Coliseum Forum is it does take a little bit of hubris to say like, yeah, I can make comics. What was like kind of your origin story where you're like, yeah, I'm gonna draw comics and then I'm going to sell them myself.
Um, I had wanted to make comics for a long, long time. I mean, since I was a kid, and never really found my voice. Never really found a style that I was happy with. I was always super self-critical. So I for the longest time, I didn't think what I was doing was good enough to show anybody. So it wasn't until the internet started getting really big and there were a lot of blogs popping up that I started to post some art online. And there was one blog in particular, it's called Covered, put together by a guy named Robert Gooden. And it was through that Covered blog that I met Aaron Conley and Damon Gentry.
Hey, another couple of guys we're big fans of.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So they sent me some of their stuff, and they had a website going at the time, and I really liked what they were doing, and vice versa. So making that initial connection with these people that were on the other side of the country, uh, like-minded artists that were just getting started out, really. We all decided to start putting more and more work out there. They initially were having me put work on their website. I was doing a comic strip called Slobberknocker, and they were nice enough to put that up on theirs. And when I started printing some stuff, those guys did some stories for me, did some artwork, and I don't think if I hadn't met them, I don't know if I'd be doing this because they were the ones that said, "Hey, you want to do a strip?" And that's what got the ball rolling was that invitation.
So Aaron and Damon, they were like, "Hey, do a strip," and that's really where this starts.
Yep, yep.
And then so your first strip is Slobberknocker, right? But that's really kind of also the genesis of Cankor at the same time, right?
Pretty much because it was very much a superhero parody, not a very good one, but that was what I was interested in drawing. I felt
Sure.
like, well, I could put together this crew of weird superheroes, and that's what the Covered blog really was taking. I personally, you could do whatever cover you wanted, but I
Right.
was taking Silver Age Marvel and DC covers and recreating those, making them a little more absurd, a little more bizarre.
Sure.
So I just used that as the launch pad for Slobberknocker, saying, well, take those types of characters, put them in bizarre situations,
Right.
and then just felt like, well, I'll start doing a web comic and see how it comes out, and here we are.
So what where was the delineation when with like, okay, I'm doing Slobberknocker, but I this character Cankor, he kind of resonates with me a little bit more. So that's gonna be my guy. Cankor is my guy.
That was I've told this story on other podcasts and in interviews, but I always feel weird bringing it up because and it's not a weird thing, but I had a pretty heavy duty drinking problem
Sure.
for a long time and some mental health issues. And I had stopped drinking, was getting back into therapy, and I needed a character that I could put through the ringer and physically destroy and mentally destroy and
Sure.
deal with a lot of that stuff. And so making a very generic looking character like Kankor, he doesn't have a symbol on his chest, he doesn't
Right.
even have a cape, you can't see his face. It was a nice way of having this cipher that I could abuse and
Right.
and tear apart. And that was really the gist of it. Was, wow, here's something I could just like rip apart, put back together again and again and again. That was the common thread in these stories, was
Right.
that there'd be multiple versions of him, and his body was malleable. It was all, cybernetic underneath, and you could put it in this flesh regenerator and start over again.
Right. Right.
And that, of course, is all, representative of the cycle of trying to get sober and trying to get your head together and get your mental health stuff in line, where
Sure.
you're having to tear into some deep stuff. And
Right.
it was a nice way to physically manifest that.
No, and I think that makes perfect sense. And, um, a lot of times I think that like art can come from trauma. And I mean, that really is kind of a great way to show that. I mean, Canker is a really great example of that, especially knowing that backstory a little bit.
Yeah.
I read an interview that you had done, and I can't remember how long ago, but it's been a bit. But whoever was interviewing you was like, okay, when you came up with Cankor, how many hallucinogens had you taken? And you were like, no, no hallucinogens. That's just my brain. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I learned that pretty quickly after doing mushrooms and acid for the first time. Like, you can't sit down and create anything
right,
worth showing anybody while
sure,
you're doing that.
right,
You could definitely take enough of it and damage your brain to where it's going to affect the way
sure,
your mind works from that point on. But yeah, I mean, the drug that maybe affected my brain at that time was Zoloft.
oh wow,
Something like that.
right,
Some
right.
antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication maybe had something to do with it. But yeah, it was
So
not drug induced.
your work is very unique. That's always been my opinion of it. The colors you choose, the way it's just very very vibrant. And it almost feels like a hallucination. So I know why that interview kind of went down that
Sure.
route. But let me ask you this: like, when you are creating, right, when you're creating new characters, or you're looking at a color scheme potentially for the first time, like you were just in the creatures anthology for Jack the Radio,
Mm-hmm.
and you guys did Jack, or well, you did Jack. How are you approaching like your color theory for those characters, and how are you, kind of, I mean, do you picture it as you do it, or do you have kind of go in with like some notes?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that. I'm working on a new Kankor story right now, and I have one very specific idea in mind, which is to have this. There's a drop of blood coming out of a character's mouth, and I want that to be highly rendered and really bright, and everything else behind it to be muted.
Right.
And that's really the only part of that I've really thought about.
Sure.
I'm really focused on the panel composition and the page layout. But I do think about the color a little bit. Um, your mind wanders and you can't help but think about that stuff. You're taking so long to ink pages that you're thinking about everything. You're putting together grocery lists and whatever else. So it definitely comes up.
So if you see me looking over, I promise it's because what I'm doing is I'm actually looking at our engagement in the room.
Okay.
We actually had somebody, Mario says, he just finished the Canker collection yesterday, and he really really enjoyed it.
Oh, sweet. Nice.
And then Chris Pitzer, who I believe is at Ad House,
Mm-hmm.
asked, "What is that art behind you on the wall?"
Okay. So where my thumb is, that is a dry erase board schedule, which is now empty. I need to fill that out. Back there is Vampirella, the classic Vampirella poster that they used to have in the back of the famous monster magazines. I
Uh-huh.
actually just took all the posters off this wall. I had some Kiss posters and um, the Bill Sienkiewicz Shadow. I swap out posters now that I actually have a blank wall I can put stuff on. I just
Oh, that's cool.
haven't had time to put anything new up.
Well, you mentioned
Yeah,
Bill.
thank you to Mario for picking up the book. That's great.
There you go, Mario. So with that said, I have two questions for you, kind of related to what we just talked about. The
Mm-hmm.
first being, a lot of Cancor in the beginning was self-published stuff, right? Like,
Yeah,
I think you worked in like a print shop and kind of did it yourself, like everything.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so what changed? Like, what was with the partnership with Ad House this time?
I knew that to get more eyes on the book, I had to get into Diamond for one thing.
Sure.
I think that that was part of it, but I wanted to put together something that looked a lot nicer than what I had been physically producing, because I was running stuff on a digital press,
Right.
which the particular press I was using was made to give it more of a matte finish than you normally see with that kind of xerographic process.
Sure.
But it's still too glossy for me. So, I wanted a really nice looking book. And of course, that's what Ad House is everything that Chris produces is beautiful. So that was always in the back of my mind. I was hoping, I would talk to Chris at shows and hoping he would bring up the possibility of maybe doing
Working together,
something.
right?
And I was too nervous to just flat out ask, hey, would you want to publish this? But I had, through Damon, talked to somebody at Fantagraphics. So I used that as my starting point to talk to Chris. It was like, hey, Fantagraphics might be interested in this. And it wasn't more than just a conversation
Right.
with one person via email. There was no true interest at that point. But that was the reality of it,
Right.
because the two books in particular that I felt were along the lines of what I wanted to do were the Street Angel book and the Aphrodisiac book, not in terms of content, but in terms of how those books came out.
Sure. Yeah, and they looked
looked
great. Street Angels still looks great.
Yeah, and then Eric Haven book that came out, that was a similar thing. I think Eric Haven and I have a similar sensibility. So knowing that Chris had published the Eric Haven book, now I can't think of the name of it. You Are is the name of the Eric Haven graphic novel or collection. So I felt like it would be a good home for Cancor just based on the kind of work he had published before.
For sure. Absolutely.
And fortunately, he agreed.
So I'm going to take a moment and plug very quickly that the new Cancor collection from Ad House, it is available through Diamond. You can stop by any Coliseum. We will order that for you happily. Most of us are a fan of Matt Allison, so if you come in and ask for that, we'll be very thrilled. You mentioned a little bit ago that you just took down your posters, you rotate them out, but you had a Bill Sienkiewicz shadow poster.
Yeah.
Would you say he's one of your influences?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. When you talk about characters being deconstructed physically in terms of being abstracted in some way or drawn in an expressionistic way, Sienkiewicz was a guy that was doing work when I was 12, 13 years old.
Right.
And it destroyed me. I couldn't understand. First off, you see all this other Marvel work, you'd see somebody like Herb Trimpe, which is great.
Sure.
Herb Trimpe's fine, or even somebody like Gil Kane, classic artist, but very, the anatomy was what you would see in an anatomy
Sure.
book. When you
Right.
go to the hobby store with your mom and there would be a book on how to draw comics, there's a certain style, and Bill Sienkiewicz was way beyond that. There was nothing like that, still nothing like that. And so even though I don't paint, even though I don't, do really splashy crazy ink
Sure.
work the way he does, that seeing those images at such an early age is always in the back of my mind. I
Right.
always have that as an influence.
So who else would you point to and say like, okay, yeah, this person definitely influenced me?
Dan Klaus, Eight Ball was a big moment for me discovering that. Um, Chester Brown, uh, Bernie Wrightson is one. There is a book in particular, the Spider-Man Hooky graphic novel, where he was drawing all these, Spider-Man fighting these crazy monsters that look like
Right.
they came out of John Carpenter's The Thing.
Right.
That was an early exposure to him. Anybody that the work is somewhat unsettling
Right.
always appealed to me.
Sure.
So if the work was a little bit off, even guys, there's a guy named Jesse Santos who did some Dr. Spector work. What was the other one? Dagar, I think, is the name. Now I can't think of the publisher on those.
Sure.
Everybody, people who know it, but
Right.
his work was really weird and like almost made me sick to my stomach when I would see it. So at the time as a kid, it bothered me, but as an adult, it really appeals to me. Even Jack Kirby was that way. The
Right.
first time I saw Jack Kirby, I was used to John Byrne,
Sure.
and then you see Jack Kirby stuff, and it's bizarre almost,
Yeah,
the way he
absolutely.
rendered people. So Kirby is definitely an influence as well.
So we talked about this a little bit earlier. You mentioned that you have this idea for this canker story, and with the blood and the muted colors behind it. Let's talk a little about your creative process. When you sit down, how do you first start? First, where do you come up with your ideas? Like, where is like do you read something or see something like, or are you planning this out like months in ahead? Like, how do you approach like a new story?
Well, so right now, the story that I'm working on isn't even really a story at this point. It's a series of images that I know are going to be part of this narrative. I just don't know what part they are.
Right.
I have this character who's going to be a variation of Kankor, but you can see the lower part of his mouth. He does have eyes.
Okay.
I posted some images from it on Instagram, and people assumed it was a Dark Knight Returns piece, because there's all these artists right now that are working on recreations of Dark Knight
Yeah, I
Returns
heard it.
pages.
Aaron did a page, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Felix Liu's putting that together, I guess, and so people had assumed that I was doing that, and maybe I was influenced by that. Knowing that was happening,
Sure.
I started looking at the Dark Knight Returns artist edition or gallery edition, whatever that is, all the original art for that, along with Frank Miller's Sin City. So I'm visually inspired by that stuff, and I had particular things that I wanted the character to be doing. I just don't know what's happening before or after that.
Right.
So right now I'm piecing that together, trying to figure out, okay, what got this character to this point? And that's been the starting process for each of these books.
Okay.
Is a single image, something in particular that I wanted to just draw.
Right.
And not as a one-off thing, not in a sketchbook. It's like, this is going to be a part of a comic book story.
Sure.
I just don't know what it is yet.
So then, okay, so you have that spark, that kind of genesis for this next idea. When you finally have it fleshed out, right, you're ready to script it. What's your process like in terms of like, do you storyboard? Like, how do you handle like actually going about the creation of these books?
There's occasional thumbnails just on the back of an envelope, or
Right.
I have my drawing board is made of glass, and it's
Okay.
really bothersome to me because I have a little bit of an OCD with fingerprints. So there's fingerprints all over this glass, and so I have big sheets of paper covering that, and I will doodle on that. So I have doodles of things, as I'm working on a commission or something.
Right.
I'll be drawing stuff in the corner. If I think of a particular idea, I'll sketch that out really quick. When I got I got a small batch of the Kankor books from Chris, and in between each book, the printer had put in a sheet of paper the size of the book to keep the covers clean.
Yeah.
And so I have that stack. And so I was like, oh, I'll use these to lay out the book. I'm going to be really disciplined this time. And I'm going to lay out the entire book beginning to end before I even start drawing a page.
Right.
And I did that for maybe 3 pages.
And then back to the old ways.
Yeah, right back to the old ways. Because it just becomes, I don't know, you're drawing things twice. That's the killer for me, is when I'm drawing something twice.
Right.
And I know there are methods to do it. Some people, will take that thumbnail. I think Aaron does this, and scan it, blow it up, and then pencil over that. But even then, at that point, you're almost drawing it 3 times. So right. I like to just, have it on the page that it's going to end up on as often as possible. So I don't do a whole lot of, there's no scripting at all ahead of time, really. Even dialogue is done at the very, very tail end. There were times when I was doing the original books where I was adding dialogue while the cover of the book was printing behind me. I'm adding dialogue to the files for the body of the book minutes before it's actually going on to press.
Really?
So, yeah. It just, I think, if I try to solidify something too early on, I'm constantly going back and reworking it. So I just figured, like, leave that till the very end and don't, drive yourself crazy.
Right.
It works.
Isn't that like the artist's fallacy? Like, it's never perfect, so you'll just toy with it unless you just do it, right? So we do have some more engagement. Somebody asked, what's your favorite convention you've ever been to?
Heroes Con is always just fun as a hangout convention and as a shopping convention.
Sure.
So I would definitely say Heroes Con. And then just in terms of the general vibe of the convention, TCAF, up in Toronto, because it is just pure enthusiasm for the medium, for the art form. There is a sense there that the people that are displaying their work, the people there that are buying work or just looking at it, they're there, not just, there's no cosplay, there's nobody selling Funko Pops, it's none of that. It's just about comic books. So TCAF is really cool. And that, I think that was the one convention that made me feel like, oh, this is exactly what I should be doing.
Right.
This, this sort of small press, indie stuff.
Do you think you would ever pursue like a bigger title? I mean, your art, it's amazing to look at. Do you think you would ever do something bigger? I mean, I know you've done, I think you've done some pinup and cover work for Headlopper, right? Bully Wars. I mean, you've done bigger stuff, but I mean, what's the potential that we ever see like a Matt Allison X-Men, right? Like, that would be a good fit.
You never know, with the, indie guys doing stuff like that now, Michel Fife doing G.I. Joe books, and, he did the Daredevil story. I wouldn't turn it down. I'm not actively seeking that kind of work. Collaborative stuff I'm not as inclined to do, just because I feel like I'm always letting the writer down. I haven't done a whole lot of it, but anytime I have, I just have felt like, oh, this isn't what the writer wanted.
Gotcha.
And that's, in my head.
Right.
So, yeah. But there's stuff that I could see myself doing. The D and C list Marvel and DC characters are always appealing. I'd love to do a Metamorpho story. I love composite Superman. That kind of stuff is, I would definitely do that.
So let's touch on that for a second. You mentioned like when you do the collaborative stuff, you kind of are trying to just please the writer. Is your approach to that kind of work different than like your creator owned stuff?
Yeah, it definitely is. And again, I haven't done a lot of it, so I can't say that this is a regular thing. But within the last year, I've illustrated 2 stories for writers. And luckily have been given free reign to do character design for the most part. Um, and that's great on the one hand and very daunting on the other hand, because then there's a lot of onus on you to come up with the coolest thing ever, and maybe that's not what the writer had in mind. Even if the writer does say, hey, come up with some monsters, you're still worried that, oh, this is probably not as cool as they thought it was going to be.
Sure.
And I don't want to
Listen, and I try not to be disagreeable when we do these sort of interviews and stuff. I don't know if I had the opportunity to ask you to draw a monster, if I would be disappointed with really anything you came up with. Like a Matt Allison monster would be always cool. But we do have some other comments. Chris and Matt, let's see, just one. The Ad House edition for Cancor apparently is beautiful. The wet pages and the texture and the design are incredible. And then Rick was really hoping to see Matt at TCAF this year. So
okay.
Yeah, unfortunately with the conventions and everything, probably not this year, right?
Yeah, next year, TCAF is usually pretty early in the year, so fingers crossed that happens, and we can all be out there again. But yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I'm not big on traveling.
Sure.
I don't like being in the airport. I don't like
Sure.
staying at hotels all that much. Most people don't.
And you mean in regular times, right? Without the extra layer of what's going on, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's nice to have a little bit of a break
Sure.
from that. But I definitely want to get back to it for sure.
So it's funny that we were mentioning collaborations just a few months ago, because a guy we both know, George, also wanted to let you know you do not disappoint.
Okay.
When it comes with the collaboration.
I figured George would, it's like, that's the thing, is that you're always, I know, working on your own stuff, you can, if you want, be the only person to see it. You don't ever have to show it to anybody, but when you do collaborate with someone, they're going to want to see it at some point.
At some point.
So there's always that hesitation, especially if you're in the middle of drawing a page, because maybe you haven't finished a background, or you have to redraw part of it. It's penciled, and you've got to, like, I'll fix that later. And so you worry about showing it to somebody because they may see something that isn't quite finished yet.
Right.
And you've got other ideas for it. So, but in the end, the collaborative process really helps you grow as an artist, for sure.
Also, not really a question, but just a comment. Matt King says Cancor rules, which is, I agree with that. So
yeah, good old Matt King. How's it going, Matt? Thank you.
So you have this beautiful Ad House book, as we said, with Cancor. What's next for Matt Allison?
Well, I've been working with Inky Knuckles, my art rep, and I've been doing a lot of commissions the last few months, which has been great.
Sure.
Financially, it's helped out tremendously. It's been pushing me in some new directions that I haven't really explored that much in terms of new inking techniques.
Sure.
Trying different layouts, trying to do things a little different than I had been the previous 6 years. And really working strictly in black and white, where I don't have that ability to say, oh, well, I'll just fill that in with whatever color and that'll take care of that.
Right.
I'm having to really think about shading and balancing my white to black ratios. So that's been really cool. And we're probably going to open a new commission list in August.
Okay.
And along with that, I am just on the verge of announcing my Patreon page. Still working out details. So I don't have much to say beyond. I have new Cancor material that's being worked on that will be part of that Patreon as one of the tiers to be able to have access to that.
Okay.
So my hope is to have some digital material that's available on Patreon that will see print fairly quickly. And then in turn, original pages from that will be available through Inky Knuckles. So it's just a matter of getting that cycle going and getting into that routine. I've had a Patreon account set up for a while. I just haven't had the time
Sure.
to finalize all of that, but that's forthcoming.
So not quite an announcement, but definitely a tease. If you're a
Yeah.
Kankor fan, there will be some new digital content through Kankor. So keep an eye out for that Patreon, is what I'm
Yep.
understanding, right?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. We can skip over the quarantine and things like that, but everybody seems like they have a lot more time on their hands these days. So how are you filling up that time? Are you reading more, drawing more?
Drawing more, definitely. That's my wife. She works in insurance, and so she's been super busy working from home. And then she was also put in charge of the COVID-19
Oh boy.
internal response team for her
Okay.
company. So she's been working much longer days than she had before, especially because now she's not traveling either.
Right.
So I'm home and I feel obligated. Well, if she's working, I better be working.
Right. Right.
So my days have stretched out a lot longer than they had been. So I'm drawing 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, as opposed to 8 or 9.
Right.
So that time has been filled up with just doing more artwork, really. I've been trying to, make some time to watch movies and read books, but I'm usually asleep
Very right.
halfway through a movie. So
No, yeah,
yeah.
I can't remember the last time. I don't know if I just hit that like achieve that old man level where it's like you have to fall asleep during a movie, but that's where we're at. That's the life I'm
Yep.
living now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
way it goes.
so George is watching, which is great. We did our forum with George last week. Um, that anthology is gorgeous, and
Mhm.
I this is the thing I definitely I talked to Aaron about this a little bit, but what was it like to have your art alongside that stable of creators? I mean, some of the guys that are in there are some of the best. I mean, there's Alexis Zurich, you're there, Aaron Conley's in there. I mean, that book is gorgeous. So I mean, really kind of like when George approached you, what was your thought process?
Well, initially, I didn't think I was going to have time to do it. When Heroes Con was still happening, we were going to do some more uh, Heroes Con exclusive stuff. I was going to do a set of trading cards,
Oh, that would have
which
been cool. Very
might
cool.
still happen.
Okay.
But at the time, that was on my plate. Was going to do some. I needed to make a new banner. I wanted to have a bunch of new material to take to conventions. So
Sure.
when George presented it to me, I was like, I don't, I just don't know if I have time. Then he sends me the list of other artists that are going to be in the book, and it was like, wow, I can't. How can I not be a part of this? You see all these other people, this fantastic roster of artists. So that definitely got me on board because I just felt like, well, he's put together a really great book just in terms of visually. So I couldn't say no to it at that point.
And then your Jack actually ended up as the cover piece for that book too.
Yeah, I had done that a while back. I think that was one of the first pieces I had done for George, years and years ago as I think a gig poster,
Yeah.
and or just a personal commission for him. So I was very honored that he chose that as the one of the cover images. So
No, that book, like I said, just the amount of talent in those pages is just absolutely insane.
yeah,
So Matt King says, "You're too hard on yourself about disappointing collaborators. Everything he's gotten from you has been brilliant." And
okay,
then multiple exclamation marks. So I think he means it is absolutely brilliant.
okay,
And then apparently the cover, and I didn't know this, the cover for the creature anthology, you did that back in 2016.
yeah, that seems right. Yep,
So, and I'm bad at math, so correct me if I'm wrong. That's 4 years ago. So you did
yeah.
this piece for Jack the Radio 4 years ago, and then it ends up on the cover of this crazy cool anthology with like some of the best artists in the industry right now. So
Yeah, it was, and they did a really good job doing the design work. I don't know if George did the design on that cover or not, but I was very pleased to see that cover image when they started to do the solicits, because they took what I did and really elevated it. Because mine was didn't have that sweet logo and stuff like that. So yeah,
so if you don't have an Edward T. Giovanni in your life to introduce you to Kankor, and somebody hasn't stumbled across your work yet, I mean, having Ad House put these out and being available through Diamond and things like that is going to probably get you a lot more exposure.
hmm
But what for like stuff that came before the ad house stuff, any way to track that stuff down? Like, say I'm a new fan.
Unfortunately, right now, no. It's all out of print, and now that I don't work at a print shop, it's
Sure.
it's that was one of the things. And I used to really, keep it hidden from people that I worked at a print shop, because if you go to a convention, you're in a giant room full of comic book artists, a lot of them self-publishing, and they find out that you work at a print shop. That's going to be the first question: is, oh, can you print something
Yeah,
for
can you
me?
hook me up? Yeah.
And I'd actually considered at one point, being a print broker as my part-time job, just doing that. But I did that. I worked in a print shop for 25 years.
Oh
So,
wow.
the thought of going through the process of reprinting anything right now is way down on my list of priorities, just
Sure.
for the headache of it. But it may happen. The thing that I need to get over is I'm not always happy with my older art. So I look at some of those older books and I'm like, I want to really recolor this or redraw some of it.
Right.
And I don't have time to do that. So it's either leave it as it is and reprint it as is, or go and make the changes you want to make and spend all that time doing that. And
Yeah, but I think we learned from George Lucas, like maybe that's not always the best idea to do that, right?
yeah, well, I mean, I did change some stuff in between the self-published issues of Calamity Challenge and what's in the Ad House book. All
Okay.
that dialogue in the very beginning, in the first
Yep.
black and white section, that's all new. So there were some things that I tweaked that a lot of people may not even know. I did some coloring things that
Just
only
bothered you, but yeah.
yeah, it just always bothered me. But I did add, I added a character in there that hadn't been in there before. So it's hopefully it's not as bad as CGI Jabba the Hutt or anything.
Right, right, of course. So coming up for you, commissions are going to open up next month if somebody's looking for an Allison commission.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that because my birthday is next month.
There
My
you
wife
go.
is watching. I'm just putting that out
Okay.
there. Also, potentially Patreon on the horizon for some additional Kanker digital art and things like that.
Yeah.
Matt, you've been absolutely awesome. I can't believe that my job is so cool that I get to talk to Matt Allison for a living, right? Guys, if you have any last questions, otherwise, Matt, I'm going to let you get back to your day, drawing and kicking ass, because that's what you're best at, man. Thank you for your
Thank you
time.
so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
We're just sitting here being weird.